Hey, you may have heard that we've got some specialty t-shirts for sale. Be critical of the media you love with t-shirts that say, be critical of the media you love. They are only on sale for a few more days, so please get yours at dftba.com/femfreak.
Is it a rule that like any military installation, like over a certain size, has to have a giant flag? This thing was so fucking huge. And how often do they have to replace them shits? I know it shouldn't matter. And yet I feel like in a way it does matter, you know?
Welcome to Feminist Frequency Radio. This is episode 44. And I'm your host, Anita Sarkeesian, and I'm joined by my fellow terrorists, Ebony Astor.
That is the worst intro yet.
And Carolyn Vetted.
Wow. Holla. Holla. Right? Isn't that what terrorists say in all the movies and TV shows?
And as we learned from Zara Norbash, that just means hurry up. Come on.
Yalla. Yalla. Sorry, my bad. Yalla. Yes.
Yeah.
Hurry up.
Yeah.
Explode something already, would you? We're terrorists.
This is the show that asks you to be critical of the media you love. Or alternatively, we're the feminist killjoys coming for your media, depending on your perspective. Today's show will dive into Jack Ryan, the latest questionable Tom Clancy epic on Amazon Prime. And as always, we'll finish the show by each sharing a little something in What's Your FREQ-Out? Now, on with the show. Before we begin, I need to issue a very sincere correction. So a few weeks back, we released a bonus episode, which we actually released to the public because we thought it had a really interesting conversation about media consumption and engagement. But we used Guacamelee, a game by Drinkbox Studios, to kick off this conversation. I had said, so Guacamelee is a game that takes place in Mexico, basically.
The Mexiverse.
The Mexiverse. It uses a ton of imagery and cultural identity of Mexican culture. And I said that it was made by a bunch of white people. And that kicked off this conversation about cultural appropriation and how we choose what media to engage with. Also, it is one of my favorite games, for sure. I got a email from one of the creators of the game. His name is Augusto Quijano. Wow, I totally prepped to say that right and I fucked it up. Anyways, it was the fucking nicest email. Like, this dude should have ripped me a new one. And he just said, hey, I heard your bonus episode. I want to let you know that I'm Mexican from Mexico, and it was my idea. Like, I pitched this. It is not an entirely white team. It is definitely led by someone of the culture it's speaking of. And that, so correction issued.
Mm-hmm.
We fucked up. I don't know why. For years, I've been thinking that it was made by a bunch of white folks. So I can like this game more now, I think. I feel a little less bad about it. But I do want to thank him for being so, taking the time to tell us, to correct us, and also just the niceness of the email. I know I'm going off, but like, he should have been an asshole to me, and he wasn't. So thank you. Go play the game. It's delightful. And if we fuck other things up, please let us know, and we will we'll correct them. So, yeah. All right.
So before we go any further, though, I have to say, I'm confused. Where's our live audience cheering us on as we...
It is hard to work without that.
I mean, yeah, like, look, I've had a taste now of walking out onto the stage while being cheered on by hundreds of people. I mean, you expect me to go back to recording this in a studio with no live audience whatsoever?
Hey! Oh,
Okay.
Carolyn, we love you.
All right. Yeah, that's good. Okay. All right. Yeah, now, good. Now I'm ready to record the show.
All right,
yeah,
cool,
yeah. Thanks.
cool.
Thanks, Anita.
Great. So why don't you let us know what's going on in the world after all of that?
Ooh, okay. In the world specifically of Hollywood pop culture, but it's all going to lay it out right now. Both of the big stories that I have for you now are, sexual harassment related. So first of all, Olivia Munn is one of the cast members of The Predator, not to be confused with Predator. I just want to make that clear. I'm talking very specifically about The Predator in theaters now, not the Arnold Schwarzenegger flick Predator from the 80s. Director Shane Black there was a scene in the film in which Olivia Munn's character was hit on by a character who was played by director Shane Black's friend, who has a very serious. He's a registered, child sex offender.
In the movie or in life?
In real life, he has this child. He's a registered sex offender. But it wasn't disclosed to Olivia Munn at the time of shooting. When she found out, she contacted the studio releasing the film. They cut the scene from the movie before it was released to theaters. But then what became an issue was that as Olivia Munn was giving interviews, like promoting the film. And she was supposed to be with some of her male fellow cast members. They did not show up to be with her in those interviews. Probably because they just didn't want to talk about this issue, right? So Olivia Munn said at one point. It's not an easy thing to be the one to speak up. There are people who get mad at you for not helping them bury it. I'm sitting here by myself when I should be with the rest of the cast. So she made it very clear that she was not pleased by the lack of support she was getting from her fellow castmates. So the only actor in the cast who has stood up, made a statement in support of her is Sterling K. Brown, who did tweet his support of her and has made statements like now in support of her. But still, the silence from, I think, the male cast of the film in general has been pretty deafening, and that's really a shame.
That's so fucked up.
Yeah.
Well, the whole thing is fucked up, but also, so we talked like Me Too happened and everyone was like, oh my God, does this mean that there's going to be a change? Are people going to step up or whatever? And we're seeing so much that the answer is no.
Exactly. Yeah. And so sort of a weird mirror of this situation with Olivia Munn, where her male, cast members did not really take the opportunity to come out in clear support of her is, Julie Chen, who is married to Les Moonves, the soon-to-be ousted or ousted CBS CEO, who against whom the sexual harassment and just gender discrimination allegations just piled up and piled up and piled up. On the sort of most recent episode of Big Brother, which she hosts, she signed off in a way that she has never signed off on that show before. She signed off by saying, thanks for watching Big Brother. I'm Julie Chen Moonves. Which is just this big,
Whoa.
fuck you, big, I'm standing by my man, but also cannot be interpreted as anything also but a kind of fuck you to all the women who have come forward with these allegations against her husband, right? Meanwhile, this past week, also with regard to Les Moonves, the creator of Designing Women and a lot of other hit shows at CBS, Linda Bloodworth-Thomason, wrote a really scathing piece that just went into so much detail about her experiences at CBS when, she was like CBS's biggest, or one of their biggest hit makers. She had been involved in the creation of all these series. And when Moonves took over CBS, he basically, despite the fact that some of those shows were very successful and everything, and that she had this contract to produce more pilots for them over the next several years, he basically kept saying, often, so this is Linda Bloodworth-Thomason speaking about Les Moonves. She said, often if he would catch me in the parking lot, he would make sure to tell me that my script was one of the best he'd read, but that he decided in the end not to do it. She said, it always seemed that he enjoyed telling me this. So he just, and she goes on to say about Moonves, mostly he presided over a plethora of macho crime shows featuring a virtual genocide of dead naked hotties in morgue drawers, with sadistic female autopsy reports ratcheted up each week. And then she says, is that a missing breast implant, Lieutenant? Yes, sir. We also found playing cards in her uterus.
Oh.
I mean, that's her
No,
being
she
funny.
took him to the
obviously,
cross
but
in
still.
that one. One of the things that I loved about Linda Bloodworth-Thomason's piece is that, you know, she makes it clear that although she was not the victim of, you know, sexual assault or sexual harassment by Moonves, she's clear that a powerful person or any man who engages in that sort of behavior, that sort of behavior is not anomalous. It's not as if you are a great person, but you just happen to have sexually harassed some people or sexually assaulted some people. You are a trash person through and through. This guy is a petty tyrant who was determined and explicit about not letting women advance and recreating this version of CBS that was this, you know, kind of macho fantasia. You know, I think, you know, the story about the Supreme Court confirmation hearings of Brett Kavanaugh and the way that his supporters have sort of rushed to present this story of like this letter of support from 65 women he apparently knew in high school who were ready to, you know, assert
Which
it.
is bonkers.
Yeah, right? Like
What?
Yeah.
Yeah, you know, and it's like, first
Like-
of all, how did you get 65 people, 65, you know, girls from this dude's high school? Like, he's 53 now. I couldn't tell you
Yeah.
6 people I went to high school with, you know, let alone 65. And but just the idea that like, oh, if he hasn't assaulted me, then it's not possible for him to have assaulted anyone.
Here's
and so I love that.
Yeah, 65 women he didn't assault, you know.
It's
like that
so
means anything.
absurd.
Yeah, but just this idea that like, you know, oh, he may not have assaulted me, but yes, absolutely, he inappropriately used his power. You know, it's just, if you are the sort of person who will engage in these kind of power plays and intimidation tactics of sexual assault or sexual harassment, these are not one-off things. These are not anomalous things whereby you are otherwise a good person. You're trash.
Did you know that we can keep bringing Feminist Frequency Radio to the airwaves because of you? It's true. If you're enjoying our show, please consider joining our podcast community at d.rip/femfreak, where you'll get access to some fun perks and bonus episodes. That's d.rip/femfreak. All right, let's move on to our main section for the week.
Do we have to?
No, we don't. We could talk about anything else right
Because
now.
this show, Anita, I want to make sure that everyone knows this was an Anita idea.
No, it wasn't.
It was a Carolyn idea.
It was? I take it back then.
I take full credit for this terrible idea.
Wow,
Oh,
Ebony.
boy.
I was like,
Yeah.
whew.
I take full credit for this terrible idea, but I think it's important that we talk about how terrible this show is.
Yeah.
Ebony, I did not suffer through 2 hours of this show for nothing.
Oh,
Okay,
man.
2 hours of my life I can never get back. The people must know.
Oh, my
Okay, let
gosh.
me set this up. So we are talking about Jack Ryan, which is a new show on Amazon Prime. It's based on Tom Clancy's novel series. There were previous movies starring Harrison Ford about it.
Actually, hey, Ebony, can you name all the actors who played Jack Ryan before our boy John Krasinski?
Harrison Ford,
Yes.
Alec Baldwin,
Yes.
Ben Affleck,
Yes.
Chris
Wait, are
Pine.
you serious?
Yes, that's it. You got it.
Boom!
Who's the last one?
Chris Pine.
What?
Yeah.
Wait,
What?
on what
You never
planet?
You never saw Jack Ryan Shadow Recruit?
No.
Wow.
Okay. For those of you who are not familiar, this iteration is starring Jack Krasinski, a CIA analyst. John Krasinski. Fucking hell.
I mean,
This is such
they're
a dumpster
basically
fire
the same
episode
person
already.
Yeah.
Okay. It is starring John Krasinski, also more importantly known as Emily Blunt's husband.
Yeah. Mr. Emily Blunt.
Mr. Emily Blunt, a CIA analyst, Jack Ryan, who finds some questionable financial counting going down in Yemen.
Yemen.
And then obviously becomes a badass traveling through the Middle East and Europe to stop the next bin Laden.
Dun, dun,
What?
dun.
All right, y'all. I watched the whole thing.
Yeah.
Just so everybody knows that I
okay.
suffered through all of that.
Well, Cool.
Per your instructions, I watched the first episode, and then I know you wanted to talk about some episodes that were near the end, episodes 5 and 6, I think. So I watched those. So I had to sit through 3 hours of this.
We're all over the map.
Yeah, we are all over the map. And you know what? It didn't hurt or help that I was, picking and choosing what we were watching, because the show was garbage.
Okay, here's what I want to say about the show. I think that this show is imperialist, jingoistic bullshit, as is a lot of Tom Clancy narratives.
Yeah.
I think that this iteration of it, I've never seen other ones, but having seen shows where it is American military going after Middle Eastern or Muslim quote terrorists. He is in this, whatever. I think that the show attempts to subvert that and tries to make it a little more quote unquote even keeled, but fails fucking miserably at it. And that we should not give it the credit that some people are trying to give it for doing those things. So what I'm referring to is when the show starts, the man, Suleiman, who is like the main terrorist guy that they're going after, him and his brother, their town was attacked by the U.S. military as a child. So that was what radicalized him.
While they were listening to Safety Dance.
Right?
No, I mean...
Because they loved America. So they're showing like the origin of it's really America's fault that this is happening to some degree.
Importantly, they really kind of don't, right? We pass
they
it off
don't.
on the French. We pass it off on the French.
That's what I'm saying.
We can't even fully accept responsibility. It's those shitty couple of French cops who wind up being the sort of inciting incident.
But then you have stuff that happens near the end where they're like, but this happened in France. Why don't we just let France deal with it? The American military and CIA and intelligence are like, why are we getting involved? This isn't our problem. And there's these big sweeping, it's the world's problem. And where do you think they're going to go next? And of course, America needs to get involved. Bullshit.
Yeah, I do want to talk about how, because I feel like the producers of this show, or the creators of it, very consciously tried to, you can see how they very consciously tried to do everything to, cut off or shut down any criticism that the show is, Islamophobic. So you have, there's this scene in the second episode. You have Jim Greer, played by,
James.
Wendell Pierce, who's this actor who I really like.
Love him.
And he has to leave the CIA office to go do something. And what does he go do? He goes to meet with the imam from his mosque. This is where you find out, he's Muslim. He's kind of struggling with the faith because he converted to Islam really for his wife. But the imam is like, please, remember, you may have given up on Allah, but Allah has never given up on you. So obviously you're meant to think, well, not all Muslims are bad, right?
Yeah.
But the American Muslims maybe can be fine.
Yeah, so there's a scene later on too. So him being Muslim doesn't come up a ton, but they definitely set that up. That's the most obvious. There's a scene in another episode where they're with a French police officer, and Greer is in a car with this white French dude who's going off about Muslims and blah blah blah, a lot of Islamophobic stuff. And Greer pulls out a tisba, which is the beads.
Yes.
And he's playing with them. Not playing with them, he's using them. And the guy's like, what is that? He's like, he makes a comment about, when I can't pray, I use these to pray to Allah for, I just fucked it up. Basically being like, you're an asshole, and I'm praying to Allah to not fucking deck you right now.
Right,
yeah.
right.
And it was I love Wendell Pierce. I love that he plays the same character every fucking time because it's such a good character.
Yeah.
And it was a beautiful moment, but it is that bullshit of, these are the bad Muslims and these are the good Muslims.
Right,
and
right. Another thing I have to say is that, you do see a lot of, I don't know whether they were shot on location in places like Yemen or not, if it's all but whether they were or not.
I think a lot of it takes place in Turkey.
Okay, but you see these kinds of locations that are really beautiful. There's shots in the first episode of merchants with all these really colorful spices and things, and just the architecture is beautiful. And there's so much beauty there. And it's I get frustrated because like almost the only times I, as like a consumer of Western media, see places like this, whether it's in like Call of Duty Modern Warfare or, TV shows like this or fucking Zero Dark 30 or whatever, it's almost always part of some terrorist narrative. It's almost never like just a story about the lives of people in those places.
Yeah.
And that's really sad.
I want to go back and really kind of frame the larger show. So, Anita, as you said, this is a show about Jack Ryan, this economics PhD who we learn has come to the State Department from Wall Street. He is a former Marine. And I think the show really works hard to kind of give him his kind of like physical masculine bona fides in addition to making him an egghead, right? So we see that scene of him answering questions, rapid fire Jeopardy questions, getting them all right. And so we're meant to understand that this is an incredibly accomplished, incredibly brilliant analyst, but also he likes sports and he works out. So he's a real man. He's not just some egghead
and
who's
he's
removed.
Former Marine. He's a Marine.
So he's not removed from, kind of like the macho considerations of the world. He is, in effect, like a real man. And I thought that was really interesting given the kind of iterations of Jack Ryan that we've had in the past, but that's neither here nor there. So this character, Jack Ryan, is an analyst in the State Department. He has flagged these kind of anomalous financial transactions. No one takes him seriously. He acts on them. He sort of goes rogue, acts on them. It turns out his theories are correct, and they are put on the trail of the big bad Suleiman. One of the things that disturbed me so much about the way this show tried to have it both ways and suggest that, there is, radical Islamic terror that, is a global phenomenon that we need to fight on every front. But also these people, maybe we're partially to blame for where they are. Is this the opening scene where we see Suleiman, what we learn is Suleiman and his younger brother in Lebanon, listening to Safety Dance, having a good time, laughing with their family, and then watching these fighter jets come and then decimate the area. And we see what we assume is 2 children blown up. I was so angry because it is not that I want to see anything happen to children. And it's not as if we see like their bodies physically blown up, but nevertheless, it is so much rarer to see violence against white children in the media, real or implied, because people simply don't accept it. But in a way, we have been conditioned to accept violence against brown bodies in a way that we haven't for white bodies. And so when the show tries to suggest that, perhaps it's, partially due to our misguided actions that these people are now behaving the way that they are, I'm like, no, they're the way that you're trying to humanize them now is too little, too late. The trauma that they've incurred doesn't resonate with your Western audience as much because there's a whole system in place whereby we haven't been taught to see them as human, Like it just felt so flat. And when we see, the versions of like the good Muslim or the good Middle Easterner, it's when people are approximating whiteness or Westernness to some extent. So you have Jim Greer's character, right? Or in the past when we see Suleiman in France, speaking French at the bank and whatever, and it's like, oh, see, like the closer they get to whiteness, the closer they get to, they can, when they don that mask, they're more civilized. Oh my God, I hated this show so much.
Yeah, there was for me, to me, okay, so in the first episode, again, you have these scenes in Yemen and stuff. I think most of the first episode's kind of Middle Eastern action takes place in Yemen. And then you cut to this, like, extremely fancy garden party that Jack Ryan is attending because, his old boss wants to talk to him. And the juxtaposition there between the lives of the people, in like the Middle East and at this like luxurious garden party. I mean, I know that I know that the creators would deny this, but to me, there just seems to be implicit in like the politics of a show like this, where these people who are justifiably angry are taking actions to disrupt the world order that keeps them living in like relative poverty and, you know, struggling while the United States enjoys such wealth. You know, I just feel like there is this implicit political attitude there of look, you know, this is the natural order of things. Our lives here in the U.S. like matter. Yours don't so much. And, you know, the way you're trying to change it is unacceptable. So just like accept that this is the way that things are. Like just accept that is your world and your reality.
If you contrast the way that scenes that are set in the West or in predominantly white spaces are presented versus scenes set somewhere in the Middle East or in Turkey or in predominantly brown spaces, the way that they are given to us is entirely different. So like you say with this garden party, in these white spaces, the sound is lower, it is more ordered, it is more expansive. The people are shot, you know, straight on, versus when we are in these brown spaces, the sound is a cacophony. The shots are much tighter. It feels claustrophobic, as if to suggest, and it does, that whiteness is meant to emphasize the difference between like order versus chaos, civilization versus savagery. You know, it's so clear that this show at its heart actually does believe that there is something fundamentally alien about brown people and about Middle Easterners that perhaps can never be overcome.
I agree with you. And so having been to places similar to this, it is louder and it is tighter and it is narrower spaces, and like it is different than you know what the West generally is. And so what's interesting to me is that they're using these modes of like they're using film language to define the parameters that Ebony just laid out really well, but also like those spaces are not bad, or there's no value attached to them. They're just the way that these communities have operated for fucking centuries. And how do we frame those as celebratory and happy and good and neutral and whatever, right? As opposed to being like, well, this is chaos and this isn't, even though it's not.
Right.
Like it is. I'm sorry. I don't mean that it's not chaos. I mean, I do. I mean. I don't know where I'm going with this, but it's just different. And as opposed to adding, and as opposed to us putting our Western lens onto it, being like, but this is how this culture operates.
And I think that could happen in a different kind of narrative. Like I think that, you know, films by filmmakers in you know from that part of the world, kind of, who are just telling stories about the people in that culture. I think because the people there would be being framed differently, it could frame the environment differently. Whereas I'm not sure at this point in 2018, no matter how careful and how like thoughtful the creators are about these things, as we've said, like the creators of this show to some extent have tried to be, I don't know if you can have a show that centers like a white man as like the hero, you know, who gets all these moments of like determination and focus and like heroism, you know, who's pitted against brown men, brown skin that we've seen associated with terrorism and violence for so long, and little else. Like very rarely have these people had the chance to be, you know, human, like fully defined, complex human beings on our screens, in our stories. Like, I think that the ideological baggage that just comes inherently with a show like this is going to prevent like that, you know, a kind of like I just don't think you can do the show and have it not be fucked up, right? Sure. Yeah, and that's the problem.
Remember that scene where Jim Greer, played by the wonderful Wendell Pierce, is, you know, talking to Jack Ryan, and Ryan is feeling guilty because he shot Ali Suleiman, who was Musa Suleiman's younger brother, and he was like, if I hadn't shot him, maybe we would have had forewarning of this horrible Paris attack that happens midway through the series. And then Greer tells him this story about this TSA agent before 9/11 who called to turn himself in. Yeah, called to turn himself in.
Fucked up.
And he's like, I saw these two Middle Eastern men. They came through my line, and I turned to look at them, and I would notice they were wearing cheap shoes, and it was a stark contrast to their first class tickets and their new clothes. And I thought there was something wrong, but I let them through. And so Jim Greer uses it, this anecdote to say to Ryan, listen, we can't know everything. If he had stopped them, it would have seemed irrational or whatever. And it's like, your surface words are saying one thing, but you are in fact arguing for racial profiling in that moment, because we know that then those men went on to, perpetrate part of the horrific 9/11 attacks. And so the message that the audience gets from that is, but if that guy had actually stopped these Middle Easterners, who, remember, their crime was only wearing cheap shoes, then perhaps part of 9/11 could have been avoided. That's how this entire show works. It wants to have its cake and eat it too.
Absolutely. Oh God, I hate this show so much. I can't believe I watched the whole thing. So gender, I want to talk about the women in this for briefly. So there are three women that we follow in it. Two of them are white women. One is a French, she's a cop. She's like the head of the agency. Does she die? I think she might die. I don't remember. She was so uninteresting.
I don't think I saw that character in any of the episodes I watched. So.
Yeah, and then there's the love interest, and which is Jack Ryan's ex-boss's daughter, she's like a really renowned doctor who studies.
Yeah, is she like an epidemiologist or something?
Yeah, thanks. I was like, she studies like Ebola and shit. So she's really smart, and she does play a role in the narrative. It's not just the love interest, but it does feel a little bit like, let's make the love interest a little bit not just a love interest. Like, this whole show is like, this entire show is full of tropes. How do we try to subvert the tropes, but not really at all doing anything to do that? So the third woman that I'm thinking of, though, is Musa Suleiman's wife. I think her name is Hanine. So there's a stark contrast between the way that white women are portrayed and the way that brown women are portrayed. And this goes into this long history of when we show Muslim women, they are helpless. They are they're the way that they look and act is supposed to be they need our support and they need to be saved by the West and all of this shit, right? Or they're like secret terrorists hiding bombs under their scarves and shit, right? Anyways, so Hanine is realizing that her husband is about to. He's just a dangerous dude, and he's really sketchy. She doesn't know the extent of it, but you learn throughout the story that she was given to him to fuck by her dad, and he was like, no, I don't want to do that. I want to marry her. So she clearly doesn't want to be in this marriage, which is just another example of how we are creating these narratives about this general Muslim, the boogeyman of what it means to be Muslim in the media. Her whole narrative is about her trying to escape this guy and take her kids away from him. And so you see she is threatened with sexual assault. You do see her being like, I'm going to do this. I'm going to take control. I'm going to figure this out. But ultimately, Jack Ryan is the only person who's there to help her, and she has to put all of her faith in him. This brings up one of the episodes that I actually wanted you to watch, because they realize that she's on the run and they need to get her because she might provide intelligence, right? Greer and Ryan. So they have to partner up with this guy who is a horrible human being that takes girls and puts them into sex traffics them. And so they have to like pay him a lot of money to help him get her back. And Ryan is like, why are we giving this guy money? He's horrible. And Greer's like, this is how it's fucking done. And it's just that whole episode is supposed to be this like moral quandary about like, if you want to do good, you also have to like participate in the bad. And the way it was all played out was just like, I hated the characterization of Ryan as like this like perfect, idealistic, never like is just going to make all of the right choices all of the time and everything can be solved perfectly. But also the moral conundrum is fucked up to begin with in the narrative.
Yeah, I mean, so I did not watch that episode, but even in the episodes that I did watch, there's very clearly that it's not even like a subtext. It's very much textual, like overt this idea of, well, of course we have to do unethical things sometimes if we're going to stop the bad guys. So you have Greer at one point, when they arrive in Yemen, Greer tells Jack, hey, Archie, leave your merit badges at the door, which is like a way of saying, we have to do some unethical shit here. So, I mean, like all the Americans, all the viewers who like think, well, of course we have to torture terrorists sometimes or whatever. Like, it's totally telling them like, yeah, we fucking do. We have to be like really inhuman to brown people.
But
sometimes.
In that scene, Jack Ryan just has a conversation with the guy. He doesn't beat him up because he's the good guy that doesn't do that. Like he's the good apple of the military where everyone else isn't. And
but I think we ultimately, and then later, like Greer says to Ryan again in a different context, sometimes you have to break a few rules to get the job done.
He says it like 20 fucking times in the show.
And so I think like even though Jack has that kind of ideal, that approach of not resorting to those things, while he's having a meal with the man he does not yet know is Suleiman, but is Suleiman. Like Suleiman's crew comes and fucking bombs the place, the enclosure. Everyone gets so many people get killed. Jack Ryan does have to get really violent, and so I feel like there is this undercurrent of like, yeah, but trying to be above it, trying to be ethical all the time ultimately doesn't work. You actually do have to do this really unethical, fucked up shit to deal with these problems.
This was the danger, for lack of a better word, of shows like this. Because as much as I hated this show, you can very easily get caught up in the slickness of it and the excitement of it, such that the more insidious messages, get absorbed before you're even aware of them, right? And because people like Wendell Pierce, actors like Wendell Pierce are so great, or the actor who played the sex trafficker that you're talking about in that episode where Hanina's on the run with her two daughters, Anita, is an actor named Numan Akar, who is going to be in the new Superman, who I've tried to shout out before to Anita in private channels because he's amazing.
He was really good.
Yeah, that's the thing, right? But the writing, the message, because it reinforces the more kind of insidious messages that we are swimming through every day of our lives, are so compelling that it's pretty easy to find yourself going along to get along, right? When you have someone like Wendell Pierce telling John Krasinski as Jack Ryan, unclench your asshole, like there's just something funny about that moment and you want to be part of it. And you want to you're like, yeah, Ryan, unclench your asshole. Sometimes bad things have to get done. You have to take a step back and be like, wait, what am I saying?
It is so easy to just go along with it.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
I mean, this show, like, technically is very well done. There are parts of the writing that are incredibly skillful. And although I have no particular love for Mr. Emily Blunt, I think he's fine in this, but it's actually the problem for me were these supporting characters like, Wendell Pierce as Jim Greer, or Numan Akar as Tony, with his great line, geography is destiny, and his Copacabana ringtone, that I'm like, man, it would be really easy if this show were, not so hateful. It would be really easy for me to watch the show and get super into it. In the way that, remember when 24 was on, and otherwise woke people loved that show, and you're like, what are you doing? What are you watching? No.
Yeah, we get super seduced by the aesthetic of it and like the structure and the story. Like that's the point. Like we watch media to get seduced by it, and when it has all of these horrifying messages in it, like
like I definitely like. There's some part of me that is drawn to the hallowed halls of the CIA, like these slick computers, like the idea, the images of like global surveillance and stuff. There's just it's like visually exciting and I mean like my whole life from like war games on these kinds of like military like high-tech military intelligence stuff has been like alluring. And I have to like consciously think about oh my god, like this is part of how the United States is like a global kind of at times kind of oppressor or does really fucked up shit.
Yeah, and let's not ignore the allure of the casting of this show because, like I've seen a couple of Jack Ryan pieces before and almost, to a person, it's a bunch of middle-aged or older white dudes, right? But this show, in a very savvy way, shows us a command center that's much younger, that's got more women, and has got more people of color. And that's absolutely used as cover. Used as cover.
There's a scene where they're in a bunch of people in the military or the government are in a conference room and the president video chats in and they're making a decision about whether to do a strike.
Yeah.
And I was sitting there being like, okay, I don't know if this is how shit goes down, but in all the movies I've seen, this is how shit goes down. So let's pretend this is how shit goes down. So they're like, President blah, blah, blah. Do we do the action that is potentially like, a huge thing? And I was just sitting there being like, oh my God, does Trump get to make these decisions? Like the whole time I was like, oh my God, we're so fucked. Like, does he get to make these huge monumental decisions about like who to murder in the world? And the answer is yes.
I mean, I think that, thankfully we have that resistance in the White House.
Oh, yeah.
And I believe that they are working to not let Trump make those decisions alone. They will probably tell him what decision to make. So we can really breathe a little easier knowing that there's that resistance in Trump's White House.
I'm
Speaking
so glad.
of protocol and pomp and circumstance, So in the after Anita and her daughters have been rescued, and they're at some military base, I assume still in Turkey. I'm not sure, but anyways, in like an aircraft hangar, and Anita's talking with Jack Ryan, and there's one of those giant American flags in the background hanging on the wall of this hangar. And I don't know why this has never occurred to me before because I've seen a lot of movies like this, but I have to wonder, who is making those flags? And how many are they cranking out per year? Is it a rule, like in government offices where there's a picture of the current president? Is it a rule that like any military installation, like over a certain size, has to have a giant flag? This thing was so fucking huge. And how often do they have to replace them shits? I know it shouldn't matter. And yet I feel like in a way it does matter, Like who is responsible for making these giant fucking American flags? How much does each one of these fuckers cost?
I feel like Ebony just had her weekly freak out.
Yeah.
I freaked the fuck. It took me forever to watch these 3 episodes because I kept having to stop and be like, I can't take this. I cannot take it.
So, I mean, what's fascinating to me about Jack Ryan, I guess, sort of in closing, is the way that for me it does seem to, because I guess I did going in have a legitimate question of, can you, if for whatever reason, you feel like you have to adhere to this structure of like the white hero, the brown terrorists, if you within that structure do everything you can to make it not fucked up, is it possible to produce a not fucked up version of that? And the answer
is no.
Clearly is no. You cannot do that.
I don't think that this is that. Like, I don't think that this is like, let's do everything we can possibly to make it less. But I think there's a lot of it.
I think there's a lot of things. I think they knew, they were definitely trying to address, like preemptively address or shut down criticism of being like Islamophobic or whatever.
It feels archaic. It feels old. It feels like like, I mean, we haven't, but I feel like we've moved past this culturally in our media, and we haven't at all. And that's what, like, I'm very curious actually how people are taking this, because to me, it doesn't feel contemporary. It doesn't feel current. It doesn't feel like the way that we
I guess to me, it feels like an update, like, you know, a quote unquote woke update. And I mean that
Woke
in the
jingoism?
hollow sense of like quote unquote woke update of like older.
It does.
Yes.
Yeah, it totally does.
Yeah.
All right, we do not recommend watching this show even a tiny bit. It's fucking horrible. That's it. Don't watch it.
Mm-hmm.
Now it's time for What's Your Freak Out? Carolyn, what's your freak out this week?
All right, so my freak out, it pertains to the new Marvel Spider-Man game for PS4. So we talked about the game last week, how it does have, and now having played it quite a bit myself, I definitely concur that it very much has the propaganda element of Spidey, you know, works very closely with like the NYPD to get these like surveillance towers back online and all this stuff. And yes, like of course there are some cops who are like on Fisk's payroll or whatever, like there are bad cops, but overall like the system of like the NYPD is quote unquote good within the game's like moral structuring. However, and there's a lot of generic stuff about the game. Like it's very like Ubisoft open world game with little activities to check off and do all over the map. But what's keeping me going through it is the development of the characters, the writing, and some aspects of the way that the world is developed and presented. But I guess like one thing that I appreciate about the story is that Peter is really financially struggling. Like he has basically no money, and in fact, like at a certain point in the game, he gets like evicted from his apartment. He's not even paying rent anymore, and he gets evicted. And you know, conveniently, Aunt May is a volunteer at a homeless shelter. This homeless shelter plays actually a pretty significant role in the story of the game. And you know, so as Peter, you have to like go spend the night at the homeless shelter one night, and like you can have this little conversation with one of the women there. And Peter's like feeling, you know, weird and like guilty and stuff about being at a homeless shelter. And he says something like, well, I just feel bad about taking resources from people who need them. And the woman says to him like, well, Peter, you know, right now you need them. And I guess I just like, it's, you know, it's just kind of a small thing, but just like, it's so rare to have, I think, depictions of heroic characters who have like real financial problems, who are living in real financial precarity. And so I just appreciate that that Peter is in that position in the game story.
Yeah, totally. Also, I learned that they justify the backpacks in the lore. So I know what you just said is very serious, and I'm ruining
no.
it. But in the game, you like collect backpacks.
Yeah.
Which apparently is like, oh, you've just stuck these backpacks on the wall when you're in high school, and there's like dozens of them.
There's 55, I believe.
So apparently in the game, the lore is that one of the corporations gave you a lifetime supply of backpacks, and that you just abused that. And I'm like, oh my God, that's so funny.
I found that backpack yesterday. So Peter, when he was younger, he won the like Fisk Science Award or something. So Fisk is like the kingpin. He's a crime lord, but he's, you know, he has a public image of being like this corporate benefactor or whatever. And Peter says something like, oh, and so there's the trophy. Oh, and here's the check I got for the award. No way was I going to take Fisk's money. I did take the lifetime supply of backpacks, though. So it's a funny little, like a way for the game of like acknowledging that it's its own silliness in that kind of gamey way.
I like that.
Yeah.
That was good. All right, Ebony, what's your freak out this week?
My freak out this week is Doctor Who. And I'm going to try and get through this without crying. But I doubt it will happen. So I've been rewatching some episodes of Doctor Who and kind of thinking through what it means to me specifically. And one of the things that I've been circling back around is this idea of fear and anxiety that so many people just live with either a constant low or high level brain grinding, breath stopping phenomenon. There's a super cute YouTube clip of Matt Smith and Karen Gillan and Arthur Darvill, who played Amy and Rory to Matt Smith's 11th Doctor at Comic-Con in, oh boy, I can't remember what year. But anyways, a dad is holding up his daughter who's 6. And she asked the doctor, and she addresses him as the doctor, which is just so cute. She asked Matt Smith, "Are you afraid of the weeping angels?" And he says, "Yes, I am. They're very scary, you know?" And he asks her, "Are you scared of them?" And she nods her head. And he says, "Yeah, they're very scary, but I'm here to protect you from them." There was something so powerful about the way he validated her fear by acknowledging his own, but then offered her that way of living through it, and that hope that just really hit me. And I think it hit me in particular because I had been I don't watch the Great British Baking Show or Bake Off or whatever it's called, but you watch it, right, Anita?
Yes.
So have you been watching this latest season? Okay, so apparently there's a guy on this latest season who's just like everybody's darling. His name is Rahul Mandal. He moved to the UK, I think, 7 or 8 years ago. He's a nuclear scientist, and he's just adorable. But he's so nervous all the time. He's so afraid all the time. And he talks about it. Like he will be physically shaking as he's baking or being judged, you know? And he says, like, "I'm afraid all the time. Why would that be any different when I'm making a cake?" You know?
Oh,
and it just,
wow.
I know it was so sweet. But, so I've been thinking about this for like the past week or so about fear and what we do in response to fear and how we make it through it and just draw our next breath. And why Doctor Who like has always been such a touchstone for me and such a comfort for me. And I rewatched some episodes from Peter Capaldi's season with Clara Oswald. It's the season where Clara leaves the show, and so before Bill Potts comes on as companion. And there's an episode that I wrote about in our like end of year top 5 called Heaven Sent. It is an episode that features just the Doctor. And he's essentially locked in kind of this torture chamber of his own mind. And it is about him wrestling with his fear and being honest about being afraid of dying and what it means to live alone without Clara. And the way that he kind of acknowledges feeling small and feeling, for lack of a better word, human, but knowing that he has to go on anyway, and knowing that the fight itself, the fight to keep living is worthwhile. That just, I found so incredibly moving and just hopeful and also so badass. I mean, just to wrap it up, sorry, I've been talking forever, but at the end of this episode, we find out that the Doctor has, like, the way to break out of this prison is that he has to break through this diamond wall, this wall that's harder than diamonds, that's 20 feet thick. And he and his clones, because he dies after the attempt, punch this wall over and over again for billions of years. And he finally breaks through, and he uses the analogy of the shepherd boy who tries to tell a king how long eternity is by saying there is a bird that sharpens its beak on a diamond mountain that's 100 miles high and 100 miles around. And by the time that bird wears down the mountain, 1 second of eternity will have passed. Now, a lot of people say that's a hell of a long time, but I like to think that's a hell of a bird. And I just, oh my God. I just thought, yeah, just like, you just keep going in your small way. You just keep going. That's my freak out. My freak out is Doctor Who.
Wow, Ebony. Should we just end the show here? Because that was a lot.
A hard act to follow, Anita, huh?
Wow. Well, I was also, as you were talking, thinking about like just how important media is, right? And like the stark contrast of what we talked about today of like how like media is so important that showing these really hateful, like these hateful images and narratives, no matter how they're cushioned, it creates such damage to us as a society. But also how like these moments, how media can also deeply validate our innermost thoughts and feelings that we might not be able to articulate or might not feel comfortable sharing, but that you see an alien who's been alive for eons feeling this feeling that you feel, like it can be super validating. And something that you can share with each other and a safe way to be like, hey, did you watch this episode? What do you think? My freak out is not nearly as deep and so much more selfish. Ebony and I got our copies of our book.
Holy shit.
So we each got a box of our book, and I have to admit that like I haven't been super excited about. I probably shouldn't. Speaking of vulnerability, I haven't been super excited about it. I think the process of writing it, the process of like trying to market it, just all of the things that come with it. I've just been really tired. And, we're about to go on a book tour, which also sounds really tiring. And so yeah, like privately and secretly, I've been a little like, okay, this is just a thing we did and we need to continue doing it and whatever. But like putting that book in my hands, like I kind of started crying when I opened it because it was like, holy shit, we like made this thing like it looks
tangible.
It's tangible,
yeah.
Which I don't usually make tangible things. It's very we exist in the digital realm, but also like it looked cool. Like
yeah,
it felt cool. Like, and it was it's fucking hard to write a book. Like
yeah.
it was a fucking process, and I don't know. I'm really proud of us and I'm excited about it. And like, it just reinvigorated my like, holy shit, we did this thing and we get to share it with the world. And we've started getting a little bit of feedback from people who really liked it, which is really nice to hear. Like strangers who don't need to tell us that they liked it, which Carolyn has to tell us that she liked it. So anyways, that's my freak out. Just like, we made a thing and it's really cool. And I'm actually really excited to share it with people and see what they think. So
me too.
So not to be totally gross, but you can pre-order your copy at historyversuswomen.com. We are going on tour and stopping in a bunch of towns, and it would mean a lot to us if you wanted to come out and support us and meet us. And we have some really cool moderators. So you can find out all of that info at historyversuswomen.com. All right, y'all, that is our show. You can catch us back here every single Wednesday. But if you are a backer of this podcast, you should stay tuned for the bonus episode, which will be up next. If you aren't a backer, what is wrong with you? You can become one by heading over to d.rip/femfreak. If you're enjoying the show, please rate and review us on iTunes. And hey, when you're like sitting on the couch being like, what the fuck is wrong with this show? You can just lean over and be like, hey, I listened to this cool podcast that talks about what's wrong with shows. So tell your friends. You can check out all of our work and our other podcasts at feministfrequency.com. And you can follow us on Twitter at FemFreak to stay up to date on all of the news. You can also find us individually on that website called twitter.com. I am at Anita Sarkeesian.
I'm at Carolyn Michelle.
I am at Newman Akar.
Our producer is Phil Circus, who also composed our theme music. Technical support by Sarah Morales. Art by Jamie Varon. We'll see you all next week.
Bye.
Later.